Thank you, God, for the gift of this night once again, for the blessing it is to steep ourselves in your words on these pages. And we ask that you would write them upon our hearts, that we might be more fully devoted to you in our lives. And would you please guide us tonight as we break them open. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Tell me what you want me to do. You want me to do the 45, 44? You want to do 90? Or what you want?
90 is fine.
Okay. We practice right before we get in here. Can you tell?
No practice.
Like when I read my commentary, it says like, always have a heading about a song, like what a theme kind of thing is. And so like the one on 44, and I use this, J. Clinton McCann is the guy that I use the most for most of it. And then another one is Robert Alter. And then I use Anderson for the book that Bob and I both have. But the thing is like, it's like a sheep for slaughter is the way that McCann titles this on 44. Bob had said earlier that it is a community lament. It is the first community lament in the Psalms, okay? Being versus the individual lament, which is about the individual struggles, the things that are plaguing their life, the disruption that's coming upon them, something like that. Whereas in the community lament, it's about what's happening to the people, okay? And so that's what we're looking at both of these tonight. In talking about Psalm 44, and we're going to read it in just a second. There's two parts of the discussion. We'll be like, okay, what are the circumstances of this psalm? And there's several things that go out. And if you're familiar with like through Isaiah, where in 701 BC, Sennacherib comes and tears them up, takes people out, some people out, stuff like that. But then there is the exile that we read from 587. Which is the one that we always discuss every week, okay? Where it's, they're taken away, now they're trying to wrestle with the temple's gone, the monarchy's gone, and what they're struggling with. So, but there's not a good way to date this psalm. And John Calvin even says that, hey, no matter where you come down on where this is, like some people might say it's in like the 2nd century BCE with the Maccabees, and there's some Jewish stuff in there with the Greeks. But that no matter where you come down, the Jews were always suffering some kind of national affliction. Okay, they're always suffering there. And so that there. And the second one was the identity of the speaker. And so the speaker, it sounds like, is a king that might be talking about it. And if he is a king, well, then that would be when there was a king, right? Which would not be that second exile in 587, okay, if there is that. But it would make it before the exile.
It's before the exile.
Yeah, if you want to date it like that, because it fits, but it fits either one, okay? It fits either one. If you take like what we're not going to do, but what would help, if I wish I'd have read this sooner, was ask you to read 42 and 43 before we read this tonight. We're not going to go through that because there's connections in 42 and 43. There's these literary connections that we would be able to bring in there. So after we're done tonight, you ought to go back and read Psalm 42 and Psalm 43 to get it in with what you've heard tonight about 44. But it's also the opening for the second book of the Psalms. All right, both of ours are tonight openers for those books, and they set the tone. For what follows on this. All right, so let's start reading it, and I'm going to read once again. I'm going to read my Alter translation.
Hold just a second.
Go ahead.
Every one of these community laments express extreme distress of the people because of what has befallen and what is about to befall. And the problem is not a problem. In fact, the community laments are almost all of them not identifiable with a specific event. You cannot pinpoint a specific community lament with a specific terrible thing that happened to Israel. We're not able to do that. So they are almost cultic hymns that are used in times of distress in the temple or In other words, part of their religious, what do you want to say?
In their worship,
Yeah,
they would
their
sing
worship,
these.
yeah.
They were undergoing the trial.
So that's where they fit in. This particular one expresses a threat to human welfare and security, and it expresses a feeling of extreme distress. Okay, read on.
Yes. Now, I gotta remember that my numbers are different too. All right, for the lead player, for the Korites, a maskil or a muskil. God, with our own ears we have heard, our fathers recounted to us a deed that you did in their days, in the days of yore. You, your hand dispossessed nations, and you planted them. You smashed peoples and sent them away, for not by their sword they took hold of the land, and it was not their arm that made them victorious, but your right hand and your arm, and the light of your face when you favored them. You are my king, O God, ordain the victories of Jacob. Through you we gore our foes, through your name we trample those against us. For not in the bow do I trust, and my sword will not make me victorious. For you rescued us from our foes, and our enemies you put to shame. God, we praise all day long, and your name we acclaim for all time. Yet you neglected and disgraced us, and did not sally forth in our ranks. You turned us back from the foe, and our enemies took their plunder. You made us like sheep to be eaten, and scattered us through the nations. You sold your people for no wealth, and set no high price upon them. You made us a shame to our neighbors, derision and mockery to those around us. You made us a byword to nations, an object of scorn among peoples. All day long my disgrace is before me, and shame has covered my face. From the sound of revelers and cursers, from the enemy and the avenger. All this befell us, yet we did not forget you, and we did not betray your pact. Our heart has not failed, nor have our footsteps strayed from your path, though you thrust us down to the sea monster's place, and with death's darkness covered us over. Had we forgotten the name of God, and spread out our palms to an alien God, would not God have fathomed it? For he knows the heart's secrets. For your sake we are slain all day long. We are counted as sheep for slaughter. Awake! Why sleep, O master? Rouse up, neglect not forever. Why do you hide your face? Forget our affliction, our oppression. For our neck is bowed to the dust, our belly clings to the ground. Rise as a help to us, and redeem us for the sake of your kindness. In that first section, like Israelites were told, and then it goes back into Deuteronomy, that you're supposed to tell your children what God has done for you, bringing you out of Egypt, and then about coming into delivering them into the land. So that's something that you will have. And so, but in this section, in this, we're talking about 1 through 8. That's the first section we're looking at. There's an emphatic you here. Okay, and that you is talking about God. All right, and it's your hand, your arm, that have delivered us. And then there's contrast later too. It's not our arm, not our hands that deliver. And so they're supposed to tell the story to their children, and because of what God has done. When he says, we have heard what is there. In this, there is this language that God is portrayed as a warrior. And there's these, like if they were to talk about some of the traditions, like holy war traditions and things, this is the language that you might see. One thing I wanted to point out was in verse 4. For not by their sword they took hold of the land, and it was not their arm that made them victorious. Now, I should back up though and talk about in 3, when he says, and it's kind of confusing to me when I first read it. So I'm going to back up to 3. You, your hand dispossessed nations, and you planted them. The them is not referencing. Huh? Oh, it's 2. It is 2. I got to subtract 1, -1. And 2. your hand, like you just dispossess nations. Now that refers to like going into the land of Canaan, getting rid of the people. But then he says, you planted them. The them in that part is talking about the people of Israel, the Hebrew people. He plants the Hebrew people and gets rid of the Canaanites and that crew. Okay? And so that's that same way. You smash peoples and sent them away. That's the rest of 2 there. Going back on into 4, though, that word for victorious. And I heard him say, I listened to a discussion of why he chooses to use victorious over opposed. In some places, not in this section, but other places, they'll translate it as salvation. And he will either translate it as victory, victorious, this word, Yesu, which Yeshua is the word there. Am I right? It's Yeshua. It's a root for Yeshua. But it can be translated as victory, salvation, but also he uses rescue, okay, in that word. But he does it in this type, he does it as victorious because he says it fits because you're talking about a sword, you're talking about a military image in this. And so that's why he chooses to do that. The other piece that we should say, going back into 2, in 40, yeah. So back in, I'm going to back this up. So I said you should read 42 and 43. Here's a reference to Psalm 42. In Psalm 42:2, you don't need to look it up. The psalmist says he could not see your face. Okay, this is an individual lament. He said, I can't see your face, which means you're hiding yourself from it. I'm struggling and you've hidden yourself from it. But when we go to 44:3 here, he says, in 3, he says, and the light of your face when you favored it. So now his face has been upon them in those days of yore. And now, so it's a big deal to be able to see God's face. And we heard that theme last week about maybe like going to the temple to see God's face, to look on it and that kind of stuff. So it's a big thing for them to say that. And this section, 1 through 8, is going to conclude with this, that the actions of God in their history, dispossessing the nations, delivering them as victorious, planting them in Canaan, that this is evidence of God's chesed, of God's steadfast love. And so you rescued us from our foes and our enemies, you put to shame. And so then God, we will praise all day long. That's the beginning of the next, that is it. God, we will praise all day long, your name be acclaimed for all time. That God's love has been shown to them in the things that he has done for them. What would you add anything to that part? It shifts hard now.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, now there's just a shift and we're not prepared for it. Because now in this part, we say, yet in 9, and we're going to talk about 9 through 16 now. There's nothing in 1 through 8. It seems like a typical stuff. He's recounting how good God was to him and all this stuff. But now here's the shift. Okay? Delight becomes rejection. Victory has become retreat and defeat in verse 10. And then in verse 11, God no longer is the good shepherd. In fact, he sets the sheep up to be devoured, eaten. Verse 12, this word for soul, like we don't even have a value. You didn't even sell us for nothing. You didn't even get a good price for us. You know, that's the way it was. Makar is the word that would use that. So it recalls former times that weren't so great. So now they're going back to times that weren't so great in this. But there's nothing that prepared us for this. And this is a harsh, I don't want to say indictment. Can I say indictment? They're calling and building a case against God here?
Well,
Would that be the right thing to say?
I don't think.
Accusation? Okay. Yeah, it's an accusation that you've done these things. And then even when we move into 13 through 16, okay, which is 14 and on in mine. You made us ashamed to our name. This is typical language that you'll find in a lament. Okay, you're scorned, you're derided, you're put to shame, and so it's typical taunted. And the word byword that's in here in byword is in verse, was it 15? So that'd be 14. You made us a byword nation. Is it 14? So in 14, the byword, now that appears in a covenant, in the covenant in Deuteronomy, as part of the curse for violating the covenant. You will be made a byword. That's one of the curses that he says that. And so they're saying you have done this. What we hear next is that God is breaking, they see it as God is breaking covenant because they have done nothing wrong where they see it. Right? And so in this next piece of 17, they're saying they haven't done any of these things that they've listed here, that they talk about. We haven't gone after other gods. And if we had, we would say, hey, you're right for doing what you do to us. But they're saying, no, we haven't done that. And so I guess the question is like, then why are they suffering?
That's the big question.
And it's a Job question, right? It's like Job in a sense. So why are they
This is
suffering?
the very thrust of this psalm. If God is so great, his hesed is present always. If he's marvelously the creator in the past, why is he apparently inactive now? Why are these things happening? Think about it. Think about it from the standpoint of a father, mother who loses a child, of a husband who loses a wife, from some accident, an automobile accident or whatever. Why, God? Why did that happen? She was a good woman, and you let her die. Why is God apparently inactive? It's the perennial problem of faith. How can you justify the bad things that happen to good people with a loving God in the background?
Because they say, but then they come down to it. And then when we get into 17 through 22,
Yeah.
they say it just comes down to it's because of you that we suffer. It's not because of the things we've done. It's not, and now but in their view of God's activity, I mean, everything, good, bad, ugly, was part of the experience of God. That's life, every life experience, no matter what the take you put on it, it comes from God. Again, am I wrong in saying it that way?
It happens because God lets mankind make decisions, and he, through those decisions, furthers his purpose. Those decisions may be negative or positive, I think.
Well, one of the things I read was talking about the suffering servant. The suffering servant suffers, but God still works his way and will through the suffering. And so one of the things that, and I don't know what, like Mackenzie and others would say like this, but McCann brought out to me that, suffering is simply this. It's a part of life. And it's a part of life even for the faithful. And but in God, when we suffer as faithful people, there is still could be some purpose and meaning to it. And so what it comes down to is that, the story of Israel, this suffering that they endured, and all this stuff, it has a redemptive purpose. Okay, and then it culminates where? This redemptive purpose culminates where?
In Christ.
In the cross.
In the cross, absolutely.
That is the suffering. So they began and coming back from exile and seeing why things had changed or any of this, it becomes to this, then their idea even of Messiah, this suffering servant, like passages and moving on. It comes into that this is for God's purposes. And then Paul takes it and makes it as like this was so the covenant, this was a fulfillment of the covenant even, as we go through that. So that suffering is not, it may be hard to see it. It may be hard to find it, and you may never find it in the moment. But we are still called to exclaim, and as they did, and it's always like this one. This is in 18 and 19. Our heart has not failed, nor have our footsteps strayed from your path. Yet you thrust us down in the sea monster's place, down into that mythical abyss of where this thing lives. Yeah, and with death's darkness covered us over. And that's when they go on to say in 21 and following, well, hey, if we'd have done something wrong, we could understand. But that's not where they are.
Roger mentioned, there's a military emphasis throughout the song. And yet, don't view it as a nationalistic approach in the song. Don't view it that. Because there is a bigger problem, and that is that the people of God, who are not a nation, the people of God must live through bad times. Times that seem under the control of darkness and evil. Think of the people of Ukraine. That's one of the reasons I put the song up. Think of those people. Did you see them praying in the square?
Oh, I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sitting in the square, and these people of God are suffering. Where is God to them? It is so difficult to handle this, but that's the way it is.
But then there is this next piece though, and I think we can go through this, is that going from 22, where he talks about, for your sake, we are slain all day long, we are counted as sheep for slaughter, 24. And there are echoes in here, and of course I didn't hear them the first time, but like echoes of 121 and other psalms in this next part, where God, you neither sleep nor slumber. They're rousing God here. They're saying, wake up, wake, why sleep, O Master? Because in other psalms they say, God doesn't sleep, God doesn't slumber, God's always watching out for his people.
That's right.
Rouse up, neglect not forever, because that's not what God does. God doesn't neglect his people. Why do you hide your face? So now earlier he talked about what? Showing his face is how they got the victory in the days of yore. But now in this moment, you hid your face. Why? Forget your face, forget our affliction, our oppression. And then I think this is the hardest. For our neck is bowed to the dust, our belly clings to the ground. Dude, you can't get any lower. We are low. This nation is just low. Lower than a snake's belly, I guess is what we would say, right? That's the piece that's happening here. And then it ends with this with a call for, but their hope is this, is that rise, help, redeem in that last verse. Three big, it's a triad there. Rise, help, redeem, and that, so they call up God to do this. And why is it? For the sake of your kindness, because you are your steadfast love.
Because of your hesed.
Your hesed.
Yeah.
Do that because that's who you are. So they're not questioning God's character. They're saying this is who you are. So act like it. Right? See, I would almost go to like some of the Psalm 90 stuff on that too. But it doesn't fit without Moses. Where Moses talked to God about turn. They're calling God to turn right now and change.
Right, indeed.
Yeah. All right. That's 44.
That is 44.
We didn't talk about suffering. Because, hey, and we could say about suffering though. They had to rethink suffering, Bob. They did not get to. They couldn't just go as like. I mean, after exile, they really had to rethink what suffering meant. With no temple. This gets into nice, but no temple, no monarch, no land.
This was probably also pre-exile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We always have to rethink suffering, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. We'll go 90.
In fact, if you look at the internal characteristics of this, where he says, in fact, they have never broken the covenant,
Right.
that is Judah, not the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom broke the covenant.
So Sennacherib got them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that helps you to place this a little bit, but
Right.
it's pre-exilic. They never broke the covenant, and it tends to push it maybe around 700 BC.
Right.
But who knows? Nobody knows.
Right.
It's not too important. Okay, Psalm 90.
I didn't know this part. I didn't know that. Of course, I didn't know this is only a psalm attributed to Moses. It's the only one
It's
attributed.
attributed to Moses, yeah, because it has some of the Deuteronomic language in it attributed to Moses.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's also, there are elements of wisdom in this song.
That's right.
Quite a few. So it's,
My guy says that there's been a movement to just count it as a wisdom psalm over even a community lament.
yeah,
Yeah.
however, whatever. Okay, again, let's read, did we read that? No,
No.
let's read it. Psalm 90. This, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. That, by the way, that word Lord is an expression of majesty, kingship. It is Adonai, and that's the word that's used. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world from everlasting to everlasting, you are our God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has gone by, or like a watch in the night. And a watch in the night was about 3 hours. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. And there's another song which says, all flesh is like grass. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away.
Amen.
If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord, how long will it be before, have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. So, this psalm is a reflection on the brevity and the frustration of human life versus the transcendence of and the eternality, if you will, of God. It is a reflection and it contrasts them. Okay, so verse 2, an expression of the eternity of God. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. That's before anything existed, God was God.
No temple, no land, no monarch.
That's right. God is timeless. And with him, as it says, 1,000 years is as a day. And Peter says, and a day is as 1,000 years. God is timeless. And I really thought about that. And C.S. Lewis has a whole bunch of commentary on this timelessness of God. So with God, there is no past or future. He's timeless. And with us, we are individuals that use time all the time. We think in time. Got to be at the office at a certain time. I've got to be at Bible study at a certain time. And Lewis says, ride the horse of time. Don't let it ride you. we're cursed by time in a sense, but God is timeless. Okay. So that was an expression of God's eternity in verse 3. Verse 3, 5 through 6 are an expression of man's mortality. Look at verse 3. Yet you sweep away people in the sleep of death. They are like grass in the morning, new grass in the morning. In the morning it springs up new, by evening it is dry and withering. Yes, man's mortality. Okay, verses 7 through 11. Yeah. Sets out their what do I want to say? Their list of ills. We are consumed by your anger, terrified by your indignation. You set our iniquities before you, our secret sins and the like, and on and on. And so these are in effect a moral corruption of man, which calls down, they reflect a moral corruption of man, which calls down God's punishment. Verses 7 through 11. Verse 12, the psalmist asks for wisdom, and that's part of this wisdom part of this particular psalm. Wisdom to realize their condition, their fallibility of heart, and their transience, their mortality. Number your days. Keep track, you only got a certain number of days. Number your days. 13 through 17, an appeal to God's kindness, his work, his glory, and his graciousness. Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your hesed. In other words, when I wake up in the morning, may I feel your eternal love towards me. This beautiful thing that we've talked about quite a bit, hesed. That we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. And on. May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. What does that mean? What is the work of our hands? What does it mean to you? Anybody? The work of our hands, our children, what we've done with our children, how we've trained our children, our students, if we're teachers,
Right.
what we've done with our students, how we've trained our students, the work of our hands, yes. Establish the work of our hands for us. And indeed, this goes even further than people. Look at what has happened in science and in medicine. This is the work of human hands, and it is part of the progression of God's kingdom. I've always felt that this is how we are like God, and that we can create. We can create in our minds thoughts, ideas that never existed, music that never existed. This is creation, art, poetry. It is all creation. So in this sense, that is the image of God. The work of our hands brings us closer to the image of God. And that's, to me, what this part of the song means. Roger?
One of the things that I was reading, I thought was McCann was talking about, that we should, the one way to read this song was read it as if Moses, this was a song Moses was speaking to the people after exile. That Moses was what would Moses' words to the people be? How would Moses couch this? Because it said it goes back to Moses. And so because turn, and it talks about when he was they sinned in the desert, when Israel sinned in the desert. He comes down from the mountain, and here are your gods and all that stuff like that. And that God said, I am done with you. You're going out on your own. I'm not going with you. I'm not going to do it. But how Moses pleaded then for them to turn. For God to go, no, you're not who you are. Again, calling out God's hesed. And so that God does change God's mind. And God does turn towards them. and take care of them. And because his essential fundamental character is love. It is that steadfast love and mercy. We have a compassionate God. But when you were talking about time, I started thinking, he's talking about how Moses' problem was time. Moses didn't have enough time. And so reflecting on all this time is the emphasis in here, and it is wisdom in this. But that imagine Moses speaking to these people now about the issue of time in their lives in exile. Yes, you're in exile. Yes, the monarchy is gone. You have no land. There is no temple. But guess what? God, you still have God. God, and it comes back again to that theme that runs throughout, that God reigns. From Moses, who did not get to get into the promised land, right? He fell short. But again, if Moses can fall short, then we should not be surprised if we fall short. And we should not be surprised that God still forgives us. Okay? And so, but that God will repent, turn our way, and look out for us regardless of where we fall short, or even the amount of time that we have. I think what the talk about substantiate your hand goes back to this idea of make the most of your time. But there is a certain bent that we have towards life of making the most. It's not just live any way you want.
That's right.
But then it comes back to this idea that we will put ourselves in God's rule, in God's reign, and we will live uprightly, and we will be happy by reflecting and studying on his teachings and go that way. We will not take the way of the wicked. And man, I'm telling you, man, there was stuff in here that McCann pointed out about we were talking about transgressions and stuff that we can't go into tonight, but I'm going to mull this over for a few weeks.
Yeah, this is a very, very great song. And it's a well-known song.
Yeah, funeral stuff, baby.
It really is. And of course, the whole idea of this dust, we came from dust, brings up Ash Wednesday. Okay? And as a child, and as a young man, and even up into my 30s, I would go on Ash Wednesday to the church, and the priest would smear a cross on my foot. And he would say, remember, man, that you are dust, and unto dust you will return. And that's exactly what the psalm says. Remember, you're dust, and you're going to return to dust.
Yeah, that's Ash Wednesday right there.
Yeah.
God's faithfulness to us is always redeemed. There was one comment I found from James Mays that I wanted to share about that. Is the idea that, because like in verse 10, life is toil and trouble, right? But then when we get down to, what is it, 13? No, verse 16, it changes. There's a future. It goes in verse 10, goes from toil and trouble to where God is faithful. Where's the morning peace? The morning we had to 14. Save us in the morning with your kindness. So no longer is it toil and trouble, but God's kindness will bless us in the morning. Maybe a reference to how they were full out in manna in the morning, and they were satisfied for the day, and how it fed them and took care of them. But in verse 16, children, it's the same word children in verse 3, and then in verse 16. What we see here is that there's a future, your glory by their children, that there is, and maybe that's why you're talking about the substance of work of our hands, our children, what we put into this, that there's always a future, that this last part, where it seems so doom and gloom or not so good, there's hope. I mean, the psalmist ends this on a line of hope. And God will turn, satisfy, make glad, manifest God's work, and establish God's work in us.
Yeah.
Because he rules. He reigns. His sovereignty is made known in his actions towards us and with us. Even in the nations. See, I gotta stop there because I got pages. Thoughts. Well, the thing is that they're thoughts now, and I gotta go back.
Yeah.
And organize.
This is a thought-provoking song.
Yeah, God redeems time. That's what May said. God redeems even time.
Okay,
That's
my jaw is locking up.
All right.
It's,
So-
I got 2 minutes to go.
Yeah,
If God is timeless, does that mean that the definition of, his definition of right and wrong hasn't changed?
what would you like? Me in terms of the right way to live and the wrong way to live, right?
Yeah, whatever's right, and wrong is wrong. It's not changed. I mean, I think society has changed a lot of it,
Right.
but if God is timeless, does that mean that that puts the same?
Well, I think in the sense of timeless there though, that it's not about, God's, like say the Ten Commandments and stuff like that. We're talking about that time is nothing to God in a sense. Because he just is, he's eternal. Eternity belongs to God.
Is he eternally changing or eternally staying the same?
I think we learn that God can change God's mind.
Yeah.
God can say, and I mean, you have to, I think you gotta say, no, God cannot, I don't believe that God can do anything that is outside of his essential quality of hesed. God cannot change a rule or whatever, what's right or wrong, if it violates hesed, his loving, his steadfast love. He can't, his character will not change. If that's, I mean, so, but how we discern those things, I think we just gotta discern, that's a discernment.
I say it hasn't changed.
So do we find out
I
more?
say it hasn't changed.
God's character hasn't changed.
Yeah.
No, there are some things that God can't do. He can't do the impossible. I once heard a Jesuit expound on the fact that God cannot make a square circle because it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. And I never.
Oh, yeah, the circular questions.
Yeah.
God make a rock too big, God couldn't lift it. You know, stuff like that.
But God does, I think, change. I hate to say mine. He changes because he forgives me
Because of love.
because of love.
That's his essential quality.
And that's a change.
He is merciful, he is good to the ungrateful and the wicked. Right? What the heck? It's not what I was taught all my life. You know? If you're bad, you get punished. But there's what you're talking about. So what about his wrath? When he talks about we bump up against his wrath in our days, right? That the idea that the wrath is simply those, when we find God's wrath, the consequences that comes into our lives, that means that we have begun to try to cross the line of what is right, what Mark is talking about, what is right and living. When we start to cross the line and make it about, we're trying to live it on our own thoughts about what is right and wrong and that kind of thing. Then we bump into God's wrath.
Then you have made the same sin as occurred in the garden of Eden.
Yeah,
It's the sin of pride. I can decide what's right. I can eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, this is a beautiful, I think, allegory, story. Eat of the tree, I can decide what's good and what's bad, and we can't by ourselves.
I mean, this is there's wisdom in this, but I really got interested in the way he brought it back to Moses. Imagine good Moses. If Moses was speaking to those people right there. Pre-recorded message, of course, right? Yes. All right. What else would you add?
I
Anything?
think something that really sat with me today was the American couple that went to Ukraine
Yeah.
to adopt 2 children over there. And the war started and they couldn't get out. But some of the Ukrainian people put them in pickup trucks, drove them at 65 miles per hour over gravel roads and to Poland.
Really?
Man.
Yes.
Well, I didn't hear that on the news.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful?
Well, there's a lot of,
I think,
it's not gonna turn good for
I
them.
really think these songs also pertain to us, to the United States.
I agree.
Are we surrounded by darkness and evil now in this nation? Is this nation under distress?
Oh, yeah.
Are we in fear of war? Oh, yeah.
So then what's the decision that we make? We make the decision to serve God regardless.
That's
Because that God, it was that the only hope for a faithful people is God's faithfulness.
That's it.
All things work together for the good of those who love.
Amen.
Yes,
Right.
even the bad stuff.
That's what we had. What else? I hope it's worth your time.
I do
Time,
too.
get it, time, your time. Hope it's worth your time.
Yes,
Talk about time.
yes.
Hope this is part of counting your days.
This is, yeah, it's worth their time.
Okay.
This whole thing gives you so many questions in your own mind. That you go, well, I go through it all week, like,
Right. Yeah, you do. I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just a night, it's the rest of the week.
Well, Psalm 89, of course, is the psalm. It ends the last book, the book 3. And this Psalm 9 starts book 4. Well, all of book 3 is about lamenting the fall. A lot of it is salted through the lamenting Jerusalem's fall and loss of everything and stuff like that. But then in Psalm 89, in verses 46 and 49, you get these things. How long, O Lord? How long will you stay away from us? How long will your wrath burn against us like fire? And now I wish I could remember 89 to 49. I know it's a popular, you know it. But these two questions that come back, you asked, but there's 4 questions. But that how long? That is, the lament of when is all this going to turn? When are you going to show us your face? How long do we have to live like this? That kind of thing. This is a real, that's human, right? That's human, and that's when we cry out. So, I mean, that's where we are. How long?
How long?
All right. What else? Go back and read 42 and 43 as well, and then just check those out on that tonight if you can. Lord, thank you for the gift of this night again, for the moments that we have had together to grow as a disciple, to grow as a people, to become more like you, I pray, in the way that we discern the happenings of your activity around us, for us, and for others. Help us to see you clearly and shine your face upon us, I pray. Amen. And on, reader.
Did you figure out what we're doing next week yet?
No, I usually do that today, and I went to bed today because I had my shingle shot, and I came home like I just took the second half of the day and came home and went to bed.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
It affected you like that?
the shingle shot. Now, right now I'm on the uptick after I slept for a couple hours.
Shoot.
But the shingle shot it wears me out, man.
It's a 2-shotter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Mitzi.
We've had them quite a while.
Hi.
New York shingle shots.
Yeah.
New York.
Mitzi had a birthday. How are you?
Hey, Mitzi, what'd you have a birthday this week, buddy?
Yeah, Monday.
You did? Well, how old were
I
you?
did.
Happy birthday.
Huh? How old were you? I know how old you
I'm
were.
old. I'm old enough to get senior
60.
citizens discounts.
6-0. You're ahead of me, buddy.
You're kidding.
No, we were
Not
talking
by
about
much.
that.
You cannot be.
You're older than me.
Just a
My
couple of
cousin Clark
months.
had one earlier too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Oh. So do you feel 60?
I spent the entire day
what
on
does-
FaceTime.
What does 60 feel like? What does 60 feel like?
Like I had a good
not there
time
yet. I
with my
got back.
4-year-old grandson.
There you go.
I did. I spent the entire day on FaceTime with him.
Did you really? That is so much fun.
Yeah.
That is cool, man. Good for you.
Yeah.
That was uplifting, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had a blast.
That's a good present.
I thought
That's a
so.
good present. Yeah.
Yeah. Just had to
All
have
right.
an hour and a half, 2-hour break to let her iPad
Yep.
charge.
Hey, I'll holler at you tomorrow, okay?
Okay.
See what's up. All right. See how the medication
See.
goes.
Okay. Night.
Later.
See ya.